Hello, BookTube. I have a tag for you in my never-ending quest to dig out from the hole of tags that I'm in. This is a classics and contemporary book tag that was created by Jennifer, to insert literary pun here, and she tagged me in her video, which I will link down below. And it's a tag designed to draw lines between lines of connection between classic works and later works, whether they're homages, retellings, reinterpretations, that sort of thing. Fascinating, and of course, endless as a subject. We could go on forever on this point. Leah at Hide and Seek, the BookTube channel Hide and Seek, said that when she did her version of this tag, she pleaded with her viewers. She said, "Please tell me I'm not the only one who feels intellectually insignificant every time Jen makes a video." To which I just nodded gravely when she said that on her video. The only response I have is, if you think she's bad in her videos, try sitting in a room with two brains that deep. As they delve into literature and all you want to talk about is giant prehistoric killer sharks, you'd overdrink too. But I love the tag, and I've got a list of things here that I will just go through. I don't want the video to be very long, and I'm also trying an experiment because illustrations have been just the bane of my existence lately on these videos, trying to get illustrations that you can actually see in the daylight. The iPad clearly doesn't work. I was looking at the videos where I've used it, and you can barely make out anything. So I'm going to try my phone. Maybe the phone, it's a smaller source of illumination. It maybe won't compete quite so bad with the sun, but we shall see. So the first classic that I want to mention is a classic near and dear to my heart, a thing that I love inordinately, and that is the Diary of Samuel Pepys, who was a Restoration political figure in England, who kept a diary, kept a private diary, and it's very private. It's very strange. It's a very, very wonderful book, because it doesn't. Pepys quite often forgets what he at other times clearly remembers, which is that this thing is obviously going to be read. He wrote it in a kind of juvenile code. It's not hard to break. I don't think it was ever a real serious consideration in his mind that no one would ever read what he was writing, and yet he forgets himself and writes things that are so nakedly confessional that it's just amazing to read. It's a real glimpse into a person. But one of the tics that he has over and over again in the course of his diary, that many people have recommended excerpts and collected anthologies of Pepys, shorter versions of Pepys to people, and many people have noticed it when they read it on My Say So. They say, "Boy, he always talks about money." At the turn of the year, every year, he totes up what he's worth in the world, but at plenty of other times too. He's constantly reminding himself in his journal about how much he spent, about how much money he's worth, about how much money he was worth last year, about how things are going well, about how much something that he has his eye on is going to cost. So although it's not fair to say that his diary is about money, money recurs in it all the time. It's one of the most refreshing things about it, I think. And that fact is directly acknowledged with a nod in John Lanchester's book, Capital, his novel Capital, which is all about modern-day money-making in Britain, and has a cast of characters who likewise never forget money. And the thing is set on Pepys Lane. I guess because he thought that would be more obvious than setting it on Seething Lane, where Pepys used to live. But I wanted to show you, I want to try this as an experiment. Well, that's not bad, is it? That is Capital by John Lanchester. And it is one of those novels where the more I think about it, the more I think about it. So I read it when it first came out and didn't think much of it. I, in fact, thought it was kind of flat. But it's stuck in my mind. That whole time, it's stuck in my mind. As some novels do, and I never quite know why that is. The only thing I know about that is that when a novel does that, I must go back and reread it. and I intend to. I leave these things to chance, so I'm not going to go and find a copy of Capital. I don't even know if the paperback is in bookstores still. I will wait, and sooner or later a used copy will come my way, and then I will reread it. But as there's no aside from Pepys Lane, there is no intentional effort on John Lanchester's part to echo the Diary of Samuel Pepys, but I can't help but think of them together. Then the next one, we'll go a little bit further forward in time to Superman, to Action Comics #1, which introduced a strange character called Superman, created by two teenagers, Joe Siegel and Jerry Schuster, who created this super figure who could leap an eighth of a mile and run as fast as a locomotive, and who a bursting shell could not penetrate his skin, and he pulls the doors off walls, and he leaps over firing squads, and he threatens people. He's a brute. he's on the side of good, but he's not the Superman that a modern audience would know at all, and not just for his attitude, but also for his limitations. He can't fly, for instance. In those early issues, he has no extrasensory powers, no X-ray vision, no freeze breath, no nothing like that. And although it's never tested, because of course he's up against Tommy gun wielding thugs and gangsters, it's implied by the description right there in the first issue that his powers very much have limits, and he's existing in the world of the 1930s. He's existing in a time period. And now, of course, Superman as a character, as a property for DC Comics, then went on to metamorphose and to be adapted to every time period that the comics were published in. But the later echo that I want to talk about is a novel that I've recommended on this channel before. It's Superman by Tom DeHaven, which is... Let's go to try this again. There we go. Look at that. Oh, that's not working too bad. It's a novel about that 1930s version of Superman, which I think is fascinating that anybody would try to do that, and it works really well. It's not the all-powerful godlike Superman, and the atmosphere, the historical details are done really well. I would love it if Superman garnered that kind of treatment all across the history of his incarnations. I would love it if there were a whole bunch of really good Superman novels, but as it is, there are hardly any. And this is one of them. And then the next one I want to talk about is another staple of science fiction, another staple of lowbrow science fiction. That's War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, in which the cool, pitiless intellects of Mars invade Earth and are thwarted only at the last minute. Because they are vulnerable to Earth bacteria. Their technology is far superior to Earth. There's no chance. Earth doesn't have a chance of beating them. It's something that the Martians didn't plan for that brings them down. And there have been many homages and many continuations, and a whole Marvel Comics comic book series, Killraven, all about set deeply in an elaboration of that original story. But the book I want to mention is by Stephen Baxter, and it's The Massacre of Mankind, which is a direct sequel to War of the Worlds that takes as its assumption that the Martians would learn from their mistakes. The humans would learn too. The humans would have all their technology that the dead Martians left behind that could be reverse engineered and studied. But the Martians would also learn. And what would happen in, I guess you could call it a rematch. And the fact that Massacre of Mankind is so entertaining, so incredibly entertaining, not just, Baxter does a perfect job of fan service for people who know the original novel backwards and forwards, while also being incredibly entertaining to people who don't know anything about the original novel. But it's not just that. It's also great because it reminds you of how entertaining War of the Worlds is. Which is the perfect thing that an homage should do. It should never try to overshadow its original book. It should throw a loving light on that book. And then from there, I want to move on to Pride and Prejudice, and the modern take on it that I reviewed years ago and absolutely loved, Longbourn. by Joe Baker. We're going to try this again here. There you go. That's what it looks like. Well, this isn't too bad. See, I lose it completely if I do that. But if I do this, you can at least see it a little. And Longbourn is told from the point of view of the servants at the estate of the Bennets. And I remember the weird feeling I had when I first read it, thinking, when I first read the description of the book, before I got a galley, I thought, okay, great, yeah. Social justice, and you want to, underscore the plight of working people and whatnot. I get it. This is going to be tedious because you're going to be trying to teach me socioeconomics rather than entertain me with a novel. First 2 pages, I had to get rid of part of that because the novel is incredibly entertaining. It's incredibly involving. It pulls you in right away. But I still retained a little knee-jerk sensitivity towards being lectured to until I got to one of the few scenes in Longbourn where that actually kind of sort of intersects with an actual scene from Pride and Prejudice. I know Pride and Prejudice like the back of my hand, I thought. And then when I got to those scenes where the events, the backstage downstairs events, so to speak, start to intersect with the upstairs events of the actual novel by Jane Austen. When I got to those scenes, and especially to the 2 or 3 in the novel that are explicit, where the dialogue is lifted straight from Pride and Prejudice, I had the mortifying realization that I had never noticed that the servants in Pride and Prejudice are named, that some of them are named, that they're mentioned as individuals. They're not just. It's not just there's a passing mention of liveried people at dinner. The servants are actually named, and that had blown right past me. In all the readings of Pride and Prejudice that I'd done, the fact that these are people with names had blown right by me. And when I read Longbourn, I realized why that was, and it was stunning. It was the kind of insight I love to get. The reason why it blew right by me is because it blew right by Jane Austen. It never occurred to her to invest those people with any kind of humanity, even though she was giving them names. Amazing. Just amazing. There's one plot contrivance at the end of Longbourn that I thought was a little bit heavy-handed, but other than that, what a book. What a book. Then I want to move on from there. I've got the list right in front of me here. I want to move on from there to the Iliad, to Homer's Iliad, which has had 80 million pastiches and homages and adaptations and translations and whatnots, including one by me. My book, Troy War, is the story of the Trojan War in the form of a novel, a very, very violent novel that I couldn't interest any publisher in, not that I tried particularly hard, but the group of readers that it had loved it, although it also sickened them. And it's not just me, of course. In the course of time, Homer has had so many echoes and adaptations and whatnots. And the one that came to mind, I've recommended it on this channel before. It was something that for a long time, those of us who loved it in pieces never thought we'd get complete. And that's this. It's War Music by Christopher Logue. He did it in little books. It's not a translation of Homer. It's a weird funhouse mirror adaptation that is unrelentingly brilliant, just amazingly good. I remember when I read one of the first books, which was actually called War Music, but it was a little confusing. It wasn't. This is the whole of what Christopher Logue did with the Iliad. The original version called War Music is not. So if you're ordering this online, you've got to dodge around and really study what you're doing, because otherwise you'll only get half the material. But when I read that first one, which had the cover had the robot from Fritz Lang's Metropolis on the cover, and oh God, the danger of using my phone. Needy teenagers. We'll just ignore that call. When I first read that first volume, I thought, this is surreal. This is so. I thought I'd read everything when it came to Homer adaptations or whatnot, and I'm not even close. This is like nothing else. And the later volumes, Permanent Red All Day Long, I think was one of them, and then now the whole collection, War Music, which is a couple of bits and pieces and everything all in one volume. You have to know Homer to get it. That's the only problem with Christopher Logue's war music, is that you have to know Homer to get it. But if you know Homer, it's indispensable reading. So, and then from there, we'll move on to... so let me see if I've got a picture ready for it. Yes, okay. From there, we'll move on to Robert E. Howard's Conan stories, about Conan the Cimmerian, who is, a thief and a reaver and a slayer, carries a gigantic sword and a gigantic attitude, and they're great. I absolutely love the Robert E. Howard Conan stories. I cannot do without them. But they're great, but they're also easily parodied. And I think I've shown it on this channel before. There used to be an old DAW paperback called Mention My Name in Atlantis, by John Jakes. And one of the characters in it is Conax the Chimerical, who's a sword-wielding barbarian who's an oaf and a moron, and who plays a large part in the destruction of Atlantis. So, there are plenty of other people who play large parts in bumbling Atlantis towards destruction, but Conax the Chimerical is certainly one of them. And as far as a Conan tribute goes, in a way, in a humorous way, in a farcical way, I really recommend it. I also really, really recommend the long run that Conan had at Marvel Comics. The first 50 issues of Conan the Barbarian at Marvel Comics, written by Roy Thomas and drawn by Barry Windsor Smith and then John Buscema, are amazing. They're amazingly good. They have their long dull patches where both the writer and the artist were working heavily on other things at the same time. But when they're on, they're so on. and that's an old adaptation of Conan recommendation. And then Conan has recently been readapted. I think I've mentioned that on this channel as well, by Carrie Nord. Also fantastic. So I'll do a whole Conan video, but I couldn't let this go by without. And then the last thing I want to mention, I could do this all day, literally all day. Everything on that penguin shelf behind me has been adapted in one way or another, homaged in one way or another, continued in one way or another, and everything else in this room as well. But the last book I want to start that I want to do this with is one of the oldest books of them all, and that's Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it has been adapted many, many, many times, and the translations, of course, are freewheeling because there's the original text is so thin and open to interpretation that by rights, no translation should ever read like any other translation. But the thing I have in mind isn't a translation. It's a novel. It's a novelization, a long novel told about the story that fleshes out a whole bunch of stuff with archaeology. And it's by a great of science fiction, one of the greatest living science fiction writers, Robert Silverberg. This is Gilgamesh the King, with the 80s cover there. And he fleshes it out wonderfully, and yet manages to maintain a lot of the, I want to say, barbaric splendor of the original. And while I'm talking about adaptations of Gilgamesh, I want to mention something radically different, much shorter, and not a book. I want to mention, those of you who are Star Trek fans will see this coming a mile away, the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Darmok, in which Captain Picard is trapped on a planet with an energy monster and the captain of an alien ship. And their energy weapons don't work, and they can't affect this creature. Anyway, they have to come up with a way to cooperate, but the captain of the alien ship, his language is composed of the literary metaphors of his people. So the universal translator of the Federation of Planets doesn't work. Picard basically has to learn the meaning of those metaphors. And the alien captain is played by the great Paul Winfield. And the alien captain is wounded, possibly mortally. And over the campfire, to pass the time and to take his companion's mind off his pain, Picard tells the story of Gilgamesh. And it's well done. I say that grudgingly because most, I mean 98% of The Next Generation is not well done, but that scene is very well done. And so when it comes to Gilgamesh, classic and contemporary adaptations, I had to mention it as just a footnote. And that's that's it. That is the classic and contemporary book tag. To try and claw my way out of this black hole of tags that I have going on here. I think the phone video component worked fairly well. I'll take a look at it when I watch the video. But in the meantime, Jen tagged a huge number of people here, and everybody else that's done this has tagged a whole number of people. So I'm not going to tag anybody because I don't know who's been tagged and who hasn't. And this is a fairly exacting tag. So I don't want to lay a load of work on somebody who's already had a load of work laid on them. So I'm just going to wrap it up. But I will try real hard. The whole point of this thing is to broaden your recommendation list. So I'll try real hard to remember to annotate everything down below. And I'll tune out for now, but I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.